When I look back at the season 3 finale, I don't necessarily think the wrong people made it to the end. Characters like Gi-hun, Myung-gi, and Min-soo all had reasons to be there, and each of them brought something important to the story. But at the same time, I can't help but think there is an opportunity for an even stronger final group, a group rid of randoms and people like Player 100. For me, the best Squid Game finales aren't just about who survives, they're about putting together a group of characters with completely different motivations and forcing them into an impossible situation. The more emotional baggage, rivalries, friendships, and conflicting goals you have, the more interesting the final games become. That's why if I could choose my own finalists, I'd keep Gi-hun, Myung-gi, and Min-soo, but I'd also add Hyunju, Junhee, and Nam-gyu. What makes this group interesting is that every single character brings something different to the table. Gi-hun is still trying to hold on to his humanity. Myung-gi is caught between survival and responsibility. Junhee gives the audience someone to genuinely worry about. Hyunju brings loyalty and selflessness. Minsu is still dealing with everything he's experienced throughout the games, and then there's Nam-gyu, who acts almost like a wild card capable of turning any situation into complete chaos. The biggest change I make is keeping Junhee pregnant and removing the baby from the story entirely. I think that creates a stronger tension because now the focus stays on the players themselves rather than shifting toward protecting an infant. It also allows Junhee and Myunggi's relationship to remain one of the central emotional storylines heading to the final game. I'd also move Nam-gyu's withdrawal storyline to the finale itself. Instead of Min-soo being the unstable one because of the pills, Nam-gyu becomes increasingly desperate and unpredictable as the games go on. This creates a constant sense of danger because nobody knows what he's going to do next. And with all that background information set in place, here's my ideal ending to the finale of the games in the show. Before talking about how the game plays out, I think it's important to explain why this specific group of finalists works so well. The final six would naturally split into three different groups. The first group would be Gi-hun, Junhee, and Hyunju. They're essentially the moral core of the game. None of them want to kill anyone if they can avoid it, and all three have repeatedly shown throughout this series that they value other people more than themselves. Gi-hun is still trying to hold on to his humanity despite everything the games have put him through. Junhee is fighting not only for herself but for her unborn child. Hyunju has consistently risked herself to help other players and has proven to be one of the most dependable people in the competition. The second group is Myung-gi. He's stuck in the middle. He wants Junhee to survive, but unlike Gi-hun and Hyunju, he isn't guided by morality. He's guided by desperation. Every decision he makes is influenced by fear, guilt, and his need to survive. That's what makes him such an interesting character in this scenario. He's not fully a hero, but he's not a complete villain either. Throughout the finale, he would constantly be pulled between protecting Junhee and protecting himself. The final group is Nam-gyu and Min-soo. Their relationship would become one of the most dangerous dynamics in the game. Nam-gyu would be suffering from withdrawal and become increasingly unstable, while Min-soo would still be carrying the trauma and fear of Simi's death throughout the game. Together, they're basically a ticking time bomb. Everyone knows something is eventually going to go wrong, they just don't know when. What makes this lineup so strong is that every remaining player has something to fight for. Gi-hun wants to return to his daughter. Junhee wants to survive for her child. Hyunju wants to protect the people she cares about and finish her treatment. Myung-gi wants redemption and survival and protecting Junhee. Min-soo wants to prove he isn't weak, while Nam-gyu wants to survive long enough to satisfy his addiction and escape the consequences of his actions. Because of that, the final game wouldn't just be about strength, it would be about competing motivations. Every player would enter the finale wanting something completely different, and that's what creates the tension. So now that we have our final six, the game begins. The first platform is where things start off relatively calm, but underneath the surface, everyone already knows that it won't stay that way for long. At this point, the players have essentially divided themselves into two groups, with Myung-gi caught in the middle. What makes this opening section of the game interesting is that nobody immediately wants to make a move. Gi-hun doesn't want bloodshed, Junhee is focused entirely on surviving, Hyunju is focused on protecting Junhee. Even Min-soo, despite everything he's been through, isn't looking for a fight. The only person becoming increasingly unstable is Nam-gyu. Unlike in the actual show, where his story ends before the finale, his withdrawal now becomes one of the central sources of tension. As the players move through the first platform, it's obvious that something is wrong with him. He's irritated, impatient, and constantly looking around. The longer the game goes on, the worse he gets. And because everyone knows that Nam-gyu is capable of, nobody fully trusts him, not even Myung-gi or Min-soo, who have been a part of his journey. The problem is that Min-soo is the easiest target. Throughout the games, Min-soo has always struggled with confidence. He spent most of the competition terrified, reacting to situations instead of controlling them. While the other remaining players have moments where they take charge, Min-soo often finds himself being dragged along by whatever is happening around him. That weakness becomes impossible to ignore during the first platform. As tensions rise, Nam-gyu begins feeding off Min-soo's fear. Whether it's mocking him, intimidating him, or reminding him of everything that's happened throughout the games, Nam-gyu slowly starts breaking him down mentally. Meanwhile, Myung-gi is watching everything unfold, and this is where his character starts becoming much darker than was in the actual show. Because instead of trying to stop the situation, he starts realizing something. Someone needs to die. The game isn't ending with 6 survivors. Sooner or later, somebody is going over the edge, and if somebody has to die, Minsu's the easiest choice. He's scared, isolated, and most importantly, he's vulnerable. As Nam-gyu continues pushing Minsu further and further, Myung-gi quietly enables it. He doesn't necessarily have to scream at him or physically attack him right away. Instead, he recognizes an opportunity. For perhaps the first time in the finale, survival becomes more important to him than morality. Gi-hun and Hyunju notice it as well, but before either of them can carefully intervene, everything falls apart. The pressure becomes too much, and Nam-gyu finally snaps. In the chaos that follows, Minsu becomes the first casualty of the game. Whether he's pushed, cornered, or forced over the edge during the struggle, the result is the same. Minsu falls, and suddenly the reality of the finale hits everyone. 5 players remain. The first death has happened. There's no turning back anymore. What makes this moment so important isn't just that Minsu's death itself, it's what it reveals about everyone else. Gi-hun realizes the group is already falling apart. Hyunju realizes protecting everyone is impossible. Nam-gyu becomes even more unstable. Junhee sees how quickly things can spiral out of control. And Myung-gi crosses the first major line of the finale by allowing an innocent player to die when he could have stepped in. From this point forward, the game stops being about survival alone. Now it's about what each player is willing to sacrifice to reach the end. After Minsu's death, the mood of the game completely changes. Up until this point, there's a small part of everyone that was hoping things wouldn't have to get ugly. Even with all the tension that had been building, there was still some sense of cooperation among the group. But the second Minsu falls from that first platform, that illusion disappears. Nobody says much as they move toward the triangle pillar. The silence is honestly worse than any argument could have been. Everyone knows what happened, yet they know that the game will force at least half of them to their deaths. The biggest source of tension isn't even Nam-gyu anymore, it's Myung-gi. Because while Nam-gyu was the one who exploded, it becomes increasingly obvious that Myung-gi could have stepped in and chose not to. He saw exactly where the situation was heading and let it happen because it benefited him. And even Junhee starts looking at him differently, not necessarily with hatred yet, but with uncertainty. For most of the season, Myung-gi has existed in this gray area where people could debate whether he was a good person who made bad decisions or somebody who only cared about himself. Minsu's death is the first moment where that line starts becoming harder to defend. As the remaining 5 step onto the second platform, the atmosphere becomes increasingly uncomfortable. The trust that existed before is gone. Nobody feels safe around each other anymore. And that's when Myung-gi decides to finally tell the truth. Whether it's because he's tired of hiding it, because he feels guilty, or because he thinks it'll somehow help his situation, he reveals that he's the father of Junhee's child. The reaction is immediate, not because it's completely unbelievable, but because of the timing. Out of all the moments he could have chosen to say something, he waits until after Minsu is dead and the group is already falling apart. Instead of bringing people together, the confession creates even more chaos. Gi-hun is shocked, and Junhee is forced to confront something she's been spent most of the games trying to avoid. For a brief moment, the game almost takes a back seat. Then the focus shifts entirely toward the relationships between the remaining players. Questions start surfacing. How long has he known? Why didn't he say anything sooner? Can he actually be trusted? And perhaps the most important question of all, is he trying to protect Junhee, or is he simply trying to protect himself? What makes this reveal so interesting is that nobody fully agrees on the answer. Part of the reason is because Myung-gi himself doesn't fully know. He spent so much of the competition bouncing between selfishness and guilt that even his own motivations are becoming blurred. And while all this is happening, Nam-gyu is getting worse. Much worse. At first, he's mostly pacing around the platform, talking to himself, becoming increasingly agitated. Then he starts snapping at the others. Then he starts laughing randomly, almost like he's hallucinating. It's obviously that he's no longer thinking clearly. The problem is that nobody can focus entirely on him because they're all distracted by the fallout of Myung-gi's confession, and that's exactly what makes the situation so dangerous. Eventually, Nam-gyu's attention shifts towards Junhee. Maybe it's because she's injured, or because she's pregnant, or maybe it's because she's the easiest person on the platform to intimidate. Whatever the reason, he becomes fixated on her. At first, it's verbal, then it becomes physical. The second he moves towards Junhee, Hyunju reacts immediately. Just like she has throughout the entire season, there's no hesitation, no discussion, no waiting to see what happens. She puts herself directly between them. And what follows is probably the most brutal confrontation of the entire finale. Unlike Minsu, Hyunju isn't scared of Nam-gyu. She's stronger than him, more disciplined than him, and under normal circumstances, she probably wins that fight comfortably. But these aren't normal circumstances. She's exhausted, she's injured, she spent the entire season carrying other people both physically and emotionally. Meanwhile, Nam-gyu is operating entirely on chaos. He's not thinking rationally anymore. He's not fighting to win. He's lashing out at everything in front of him. The struggle quickly spirals out of control. What starts as Hyunju trying to protect Junhee turns into a desperate fight for survival. Gi-hun eventually has no choice but to get involved as well. The two of them work together to stop Nam-gyu, but not before significant damage is done. And by the time the fight is over, Hyunju is badly hurt, far worse than before. And although Nam-gyu is finally defeated and falls from the platform, it doesn't feel like a victory. If anything, it feels like another loss. The group has survived, but they've paid the price for it. Now only 4 players remain: Gi-hun, Junhee, Hyunju, and Myunggi. The final platform is waiting. Hyunju is barely standing, Junhee is physically struggling from her ankle, and Gi-hun is exhausted. Myunggi is beginning to realize that if he wants to survive, he's going to have to choose between the people he claims to care about and himself, and that's where the real finale begins. As the remaining 4 players step onto the final platform, the atmosphere feels completely different from everything that came before it. There are no more alliances to form, no more groups to hide behind, no more uncertainty about what the game is demanding from them. Everyone standing there understands that one person has to die, and unlike the previous platforms, there isn't a wildcard left to blame for the chaos. Nam-gyu and Minsu are gone. What's left are 4 people whose stories have been intertwined for almost the entire season. At first, nobody moves. The tension isn't coming from action anymore, it's coming from anticipation. Everyone is waiting for someone else to make the first decision. Junhee is barely able to stand for long periods of time because of her injury. Hyunju is in even worse shape after her fight with Nam-gyu. Gi-hun is exhausted, both physically and mentally. The only person who seems remotely composed is Myunggi, and that's because he's already started thinking ahead. The deaths of Minsu and Nam-gyu have changed something within him. For most of the season, there's always been a debate about what kind of person Myunggi really was. Even after making mistakes, there's always room to believe he could still do the right thing when it mattered most. But standing on the final platform, that possibility starts slipping away. For the first time, survival becomes the only thing on his mind. The game begins, and almost immediately, Myunggi takes control of the pole. It's a small moment, but it says everything. The others are focused on each other. He's focused on winning. And once he has the pole in his hands, he begins saying what nobody else wants to admit: someone must die. And eventually, there will only be survivors because other people were sacrificed along the way. At first, he directs his attention toward Gi-hun. After all, Gi-hun is the strongest obstacle standing between him and victory, and the reason why most of the people are there in the first place. He argues that Gi-hun has already lived his life, that he's already had his chance, that if anyone should sacrifice themselves, it should be him. But Gi-hun refuses, not because he's afraid to die, but because he knows that's not what this is. This isn't sacrifice. It's Myunggi trying to justify eliminating everyone else so he can survive. The argument quickly escalates. Junhee watches in disbelief. Meanwhile, Hyunju looks absolutely disgusted, and whatever trust remained between the group completely disappears. That's where Hyunju steps forward. At this point, she's barely holding herself together physically. She's injured, exhausted, and should probably be unable to fight at all. But that's exactly why this moment works, because helping people has always been who she is. She's not stepping in because she's focused on winning. She's stepping in because she refuses to let Myunggi control what happens next. The confrontation is short, brutal, and desperate. Under normal circumstances, Hyunju probably wins, but these aren't normal. She's already carrying injuries from the previous platform, while Myunggi still has the advantage of the pole. Despite that, she manages to push him harder than anyone else has throughout the entire finale. For a brief moment, it almost looks like she might actually take control of the situation, but eventually her injuries catch up to her. Myunggi manages to force her backward. The struggle becomes more frantic, more desperate, and then it happens. Hyunju falls. The pole goes with her. For a few seconds, nobody says anything. One of the strongest players in the entire competition is gone. Not because she was weak, not because she made a mistake, but because she spent the entire game protecting other people instead of protecting herself. And honestly, I think that would have been a fitting end to her character. Even in her final moments, she's trying to save someone else. Now only 3 players remain: Gi-hun, Junhee, and Myunggi. At first, it seems like the game is over. Hyunju has fallen. The numbers have been reduced. Everyone begins catching their breath. Then they realize something. The button was never pressed. The platform isn't active. None of it counted. And suddenly all 3 players are right back where they started. The realization hits everyone at once. Another player still has to die. The final game isn't over. It's only getting started. And Hyunju's death was for nothing. This is where Myunggi finally reaches the point of no return. The pressure, guilt, and fear, it all comes crashing together. Instead of reflecting on what just happened, he doubles down. Every justification he's been telling himself throughout the finale suddenly becomes louder. He tells himself he's doing this for survival. He tells himself he's doing this for Junhee. He tells himself he's doing this because he had no choice. But deep down, everyone, including himself, knows the truth. He's doing it for himself. Gi-hun presses the button. The final round officially begins. What follows is less of a fight and more of a collapse. Myunggi is mentally breaking apart. Junhee and Gi-hun can see it. Even Myunggi seems aware of it. The image he's been trying to maintain throughout the games is finally gone. All that's left is a desperate man who spent so long chasing survival that he no longer recognizes himself. He attacks Gi-hun. The two struggle. They're exhausted, injured, running on nothing but adrenaline. But unlike Myung-gi, Gi-hun still has something keeping him grounded. Eventually, Myung-gi loses. He's beaten, bloody, defenseless. For the first time in the entire finale, his fate is completely in someone else's hands. Gi-hun reaches for the knife, and for the moment, it feels like history is about to repeat himself. The audience expects him to do what Squid Game contestants always do: finish the job, end it, survive. But Gi-hun can't. After everything he's seen and everything he's lost, he still can't bring himself to become that person. Slowly, he lowers the knife, and throws it aside, choosing mercy over survival, humanity over victory. Myung-gi stares at him in disbelief. Then he looks towards Junhee, and for the first time all season, the arrogance is gone, the excuses are gone, the manipulation is gone. All that left is regret. He apologizes, not just for the games, for everything, for ruining their future, abandoning her, and becoming someone she can't even recognize. Junhee listens quietly. Tears begin foaming in her eyes, and for a moment, it genuinely feels like forgiveness might happen. She kneels beside him, tells him it's okay, tells him it's just the two of them, tells him they'll leave together. And that's when the finale delivers its biggest twist. A sudden movement, a knife slash, silence. The camera reveals Myung-gi's lifeless expression before showing the wound in his chest. It wasn't Gi-hun, it wasn't self-defense, it was Junhee, the person he claimed to love, the person he claimed he was protecting. The person who finally realized that as long as Myung-gi remained alive, he would continue hurting everyone around him. The game ends, not with rage, but with heartbreak. Junhee immediately breaks down. The reality of what she's done crashes into her all at once. She isn't celebrating, she isn't relieved, she's devastated. Because despite everything, a part of her still cared about him. Gi-hun has to physically help her away from the body as she cries. The victory doesn't feel like a victory at all. It feels like survival at an unimaginable cost. Soon afterward, the island's destruction begins. The remaining events play out similar to the original story. As Gi-hun and Junhee leave on the boat, both are staying back at the island for very different reasons. Gi-hun finally sees the end of the nightmare he's been fighting against. For the first time in a long time, there's a sense of that his mission wasn't completely meaningless. Looking back at the collapsing island, he allows himself a small smile that quickly fades. Junhee doesn't. She sits quietly, emotionally exhausted, still thinking about everything that happened on that final platform, still thinking about Myung-gi, still trying to process how she survived, and that's where my version of the finale would end. Not with a perfect, happy ending, not with complete tragedy, but with two survivors who earned their way out, carrying scars they'll never fully recover from, and a conclusion that feels hopeful without forgetting the cost it took to get there. And that's how I would have changed the Squid Game Season 3 finale. Obviously, this is just my opinion. I'm sure everyone has their own ideas about who should have survived, who should have made the final game, and how the story should have ended. Personally, I think this version keeps the emotional moments that made Season 3 great, while giving a few characters a chance to reach their full potential in the finale. Let me know what you guys would have changed, who your ideal finalist would have been, and whether you think this ending is better or worse than the one we actually got. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.